Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts as they share with you the insider's guide to property investing.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, the insider's guide to property investing. I'm Bryce Holdaway. He's Ben Kingsley. How are you, mate?
Very good, mate, although...
Should we talk about it?
Yeah, let's get it out there.
All right. So, listeners, if you're not based in a AFL-based state, my team beat Ben's team last night. Fremantle beat Collingwood, but I can't say it was actually convincing. So, at the end of the day, I preferred to have beaten you guys by a little bit more than what we did, considering we had such a strong home ground advantage. But well played by your team.
Oh, look, yeah, I like the way Bucks is going about it. I think he's building a strong, vision of his team and getting the best out of them by talking about that's our brand and that's what we do, and sort of relentless. So in terms of the what was the word he was using? The effort, unquestionable. I mean, 90 tackles, but we've got to get our hands on the pill. Yeah. And whereas you guys, bigger bodies in the end of the day, and you didn't butcher the ball in the last quarter like we did.
Man, I haven't enjoyed watching Fremantle for the last 4 weeks. I've got to say they've got the points, but they haven't really won the fans over. But that's
mate, you're sitting.
We're sitting on top.
You're sitting on top.
We're
with
not
one
used to
loss
that
for the year. Yeah. It's just, you've got to bring home the bacon. If you want to talk about teams that know how to sit on the top at the end of the year and then lose grand finals, mate, you're talking to the right team.
Mate, they actually had a feature recently on Sunday about Collingwood captains who hadn't won a premiership. So
mate, we've been bridesmaid on the last day. Look, I love being a Collingwood supporter for this reason. Most Saturdays, if you go back to the history of the game, I was always happy. Most weekends, I think we've won more games than any other team in the competition. But it was that last Saturday that was always that disappointing day. So most of the winter, I was happy, but usually we found a way to lose.
Except the main dance. But folks, for those of you who've never met Ben, never watched any of his videos, never seen a photo of him, I can confirm he does have front teeth, despite the fact he is a Collingwood supporter. So there you go.
A big tattoo on me back.
Yeah, that's right. All right, what are we going to talk about today, Brendan? I thought we'd drill down. We've threatened for a number of podcasts to drill down on a couple of the topics that we've touched on prior. Yep. And we thought we'd drill down on the pillars of mastery around borrowing power.
With a big B.
And talk about finance today. But before we do that, we've got some celebrations. 11,000.
Oh, there you go.
351 downloads in 16 weeks.
That is phenomenal. So let's get it to 50,000. So tell your friends about us. We'll get out there and... at the end of the day, this is life-changing stuff. People who take on property investing and do it well will be financially better off. So, yeah, tell your friends about us.
Yeah, good point, Ben. We look forward to this point of the week where we get to have a chance to, give back. We're giving out as much information as we can for free in an attempt. The mission, Ben, of us is to help people make better decisions around property because we see so many people make bad decisions, don't we?
We do, and because it's such a high-value transaction, it hurts. I mean, there will be some blood on the street in 2018-19 for some off-the-plan apartment purchases in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, where people are going to lose upwards of $100,000 in equity because their properties aren't going to be worth what they paid for them today and, built in 2.5 years. And so that's what we're trying to prevent, a bit of that sort of stuff.
Hopefully avoid some carnage on the streets. I remember going to a seminar. When would it have been? Probably the mid-2000s. The guy that was speaking was Bill Zeng. You remember Bill Zeng?
He's still around.
He's still
so
around?
Be careful.
No, it's all positive. He said that property investing is all about finance. It's not about bricks and mortar.
Very good point.
He said it's all about finance. And if you unpack that, there's reasonable truth to that because if you buy really great real estate and you stuff up the finance... glass ceilings exist everywhere and you can be really hamstrung with what you do and what you can build despite the fact that you may be holding exceptionally A-grade stock. So the topic of today is to help people make better decisions around how they set up finance and not treat it like in isolation. I always use the analogy, it's like a game of chess where you're trying to think 2 or 3 moves in advance.
Yep.
The theory of getting the finance right is you're trying to think 2 or 3 properties or 2 or 3 loans in advance whilst you're setting up this one. And you started our business, Empower Wealth, many moons ago as a mortgage broker. So your, ascendancy to the Property Investment Advisor of the Year started with understanding people's cash flows, understanding how to put people's finance together. And you've probably seen a bit in that time.
Yeah, it's probably a good segue to tell a little bit about my story. So I bought the house across the road from Mum and Dad when I was 23. I'd always been eager to to have a self-funded retirement program, a little bit entrepreneurial, I suppose.
A little bit.
And the reality is that I didn't necessarily see myself as a real estate agent. I didn't, I don't think I could have been that person that could have sold that dodgy home or whatever to the next person coming in the door. So when you understand what you were saying before, and exactly right about Bill, in the sense that we've got our 4 pillars, which is asset selection, borrowing power, cash flow management, and obviously defence, and we talk about it in different ways. And I made that same conscious call. I basically said, if I want to be great at property investing, I need to be great at lending. I need to understand how I can access the money. I need to understand, because I knew that leverage was the game changer. I mean, I went to a presentation. I've seen Bill talk a couple of times, but I also went and saw Ed Chan deliver a presentation when I was probably in my early 20s. And he introduced the concept of cash-on-cash returns to me. And that, for me, it's basically saying if I had $100,000 but I could control an asset worth $500,000, I'd get my returns on the $500,000, so my cash-on-cash return would be significantly better. And we'll talk about that in other videos and podcasts down the track. But the takeaway from that was, if I had an asset class that was low in volatility and I could gear myself to a reasonable position whilst understanding my cash flows, and that's why cash flows are the true foundation. Borrowing is then the next step. Away we go. And so I said, all right, well, I went and did an apprenticeship with Mortgage Choice. So I started a Mortgage Choice business in 2004, and then basically broke free of the shackles, and then came into Empower Wealth and set that up in 2007.
So what was the catalyst around, so you know how to set people's finance up? Was it just, what you've built now in terms of Empower Wealth, it just became an extension? If you know how to set their finance up, you need to then help them do some planning.
Yeah. And some asset selection, cash flow management, cash flow management, borrowing, and then the asset selection, and then putting the defence, mitigate risk. So that's the pillars that we keep coming back to. So from that point of view, it was, in the early days, it was just educating people on some basics of lending, offset accounts, redraw, lines of credit. These days with the internet, we're now sort of, 2004, there wasn't much knowledge. The knowledge is getting better and better around lending and what's possible. But the true science in great lending is strategy and structure. So when you're talking about a great mortgage broker should be able to do strategy and structure. By that, the strategy is understanding the next move on the chessboard, as you always talk about. And then when you do that, that's your strategy build. And then your tactics are around the structure. So our structure might be, we're going to go with this lender for the first 3. And we do that because their servicing calculators and all that do X, Y, Z. And then we're going to go to the next lender because they assess that servicing calculator in a different way. And so we're able to get more access to cash. And that's why cash flow management is really important, because if you do it too hard or you go too heavy, it can all fall down on itself. And if you get yourself into a gearing position that's untenable, and we only need to look at ABC Learning Centres and Centro Property Group during the GFC, they geared themselves to unacceptable levels in what we would call commercial lending ranges, where they went over 80% in loan-to-value ratios, and they got smashed. In residential property, I would say on the occasion, and you have a great comment, you talk about LMI, you can repeat that to clients. What do you say about LMI?
Lender's mortgage insurance, avoid it when you can, embrace it when you have to.
Perfect. So if we've got a young couple who've got really strong cash flows and they've got a long time frame to invest and their risk profile is moderate to high, then technically they could go to what I would call a 90% loan-to-value ratio across their portfolio early, but then we want to bring that down. Because ultimately, when you retire in property, you retire in property with no debt or the passive income. No good the income just servicing the debt. At some point in time, it's got to break through the shackles and then get us to the other side.
Can I say on that point, Ben, that I've been doing this property investment game for 16 years, and I met you 4 or 5 years ago now. And it wasn't until I met you that it was... I'd been to seminars, I'd been involved with a lot of people, I'd been involved with a lot of successful property investors, and it wasn't until I met you that you really drilled the dream down to a goal. And by that, I always say the dream is everyone wants to be what it would call it financial freedom, wealthy, retire, whatever that is for them. That's their dream. But what's the goal? And you always brought it back to, well, how much do you want? And how much property do you need to get that? So do you want 100,000 passive income with no debt? Sure. And reverse engineer that. So what was it that sort of helped you define that when most of the other advisors out there are kind of still staying up in the dream territory?
Great question. I got frustrated with the spruikers that were out there showing the yachts in the south of France and the Maseratis and the Ferraris and all that, and selling a false dream. Look, at the end of the day, there's not going to be too many people that are going to be able to walk away from property investing and have a helicopter and a penthouse in New York and those types of things.
Agreed.
I think I want it to be real. I understand that, one of the great points of marketing is you've got to sell the dream, you've got to sell the aspiration. But I just thought, no, that's not fair. These people are going to drop hard-earned cash for some weekend boot camp crap that goes on, and they're going to be hyped up into some type of frenzy to try and pay for education that is really not going to be relevant to them once they unpack it. And even though it might build their knowledge up somewhat, because you always take a bit of gold away from anyone who's talking, usually there's something in there that you can take away.
It's the old the mining tools, and the person selling the mining tools make more money than the person doing the mining.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we can all go out and get a gold detector, but if we don't know where the gold is, and we can spend our life trying to find it, and if we don't. So this to me was making it more tangible. And I think, in terms of when I met you, Bryce, you're one of those people who I just said, look, you're quite altruistic. You wanted to help others. You get a real joy and buzz out of that. And so it was a natural fit for us. And we've come across people, even we've had, people in our business who are no longer with us, who probably didn't have that same type of attitude.
Correct.
It was about what's in it for them. And I think that's it for me. So if my legacy in this industry is, and we've talked about this, that people have learnt and they've made sensible decisions and they've put their big rocks in the jar, and it's about fulfilment, personal fulfilment. Money is but a means to an end. Doesn't buy happiness.
Yeah.
Even though Spike Milligan did say it says, but it certainly buys a lovely misery. The truth is that's what money's there for. It's there to be enjoyed. It's there to help. And in some people's cases, everyone's different. Some people do it to give their kids the best opportunities, to give themselves the best health care in the future. Some people do it because they do want the Winnebago to travel around and enjoy this magic country that we live in, the best country in the world. Those types of things are, and for me, that's where putting all the pieces together made sense, and you didn't have to have 22 properties to do it. You could do it sensibly through 4 or 5 or 6 properties and do it over the journey. So those people who were in a super rush to get there and were going to flip properties and be super aggressive, once I unpacked their story, they were just unhappy in their job or unhappy in what they were doing. So for me, it's more about being a personal motivator from that point of view, and then saying this is a very good vehicle to do it.
So I totally agree, and because ultimately most of the plans that we build for, and not to put words in your mouth, but very rarely would we be building plans for a client to achieve a 80,000 to 100,000 passive income that is in excess of 5 properties outside of the principal place of residence. What typically?
4 maybe for 80,000, 5 for 100 potentially. So again, this is where it comes down to if we're buying $1 million properties or 750,000 properties or something along those lines, 4 is enough, because obviously you're getting 30 to 35,000 a year or 42,000 a year per property in rent. So it all comes down to people's circumstances, and that's what we want to talk about.
One of the things you just said is if I want to be great at property investment, I need to be great at finance, and that's a gold statement, because there's so much that we could talk about here, but I want to maybe see if we can narrow down on some of the big rocks when it comes to finance. And cross-collateralisation is often the one that needs to be explained the most, because I had a mate when I was living on the Gold Coast. He was a business banker for one of the big 4 pillars in Coffs Harbour, and he used to always tell me that on Monday mornings they used to have sales meetings, and the goal was to entangle the customer. And by entangle, it's get a home loan, get a credit card, get some insurance, and then that person is so entangled in the bank that they're not going to leave.
Greatest share of wallet. Yep.
And I think cross-collateralisation is still their greatest weapon to the detriment of the investor. And for those listeners who aren't really familiar with it or have actually heard it but don't quite understand it, it's effectively where the bank's trying to get two pieces of security for one loan.
Or three or four.
Multiple security.
Correct.
Versus standalone lending. And the standalone lending means that you take the power back as the investor away from the bank and gives you the opportunity to shop your business around. And if Bill Zhang was right, that property investing is all about finance. It gives you the ultimate power to give you the least likely scenario of hitting glass ceilings, where on paper you can borrow money, but in reality that you can't. So standalone lending typically revolves around getting a line of credit, for example, so that you can get your deposit and costs, and then use the pre-approval, whether it's 80% or 90% for the next purchase from a particular bank, without them needing to fund the costs and the balance, and you've got the power. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it in a very simple example. Let's say we had 3 investment properties and we were cross-securitised with one lender, and we wanted to release some equity out of the portfolio. So because they are cross-securitised, we must value each one of those properties. Okay. Now, when you're uncrossed, you don't potentially have to value each property. You might have had a property that's been flat or something that's slightly corrected because you bought it in a boom and it's just come off its peak. So you might have one property that's increased by $20,000 and another that's gone down by $20,000. So once the bank comes back and gives you the report, there's no equity there. But you know there is. It's in one of the properties, but you can't get at it. So imagine if they were uncrossed, right? So there's 2 things. One, you'd be able to get that $20,000 out. But how about this as a concept? What if you had the 3 properties with one lender and you knew that one property was doing really well, and you went and saw your mortgage broker and they valued it by 2 or 3 different lenders, and instead of $20,000, there might have been $40,000 in equity there. Now that could increase the quality of the property that you buy or what you're doing. So what would be in your best interest is to potentially refinance that property over to a new lender. No problems with having it. I mean, at the end of the day, your loyalty shouldn't be to your lender. Your loyalty is to yourself. You want to make the investment choices that you need to make for your family's outcome. So there's a great example of being in a position where you can actually move forward rather than not being it because you're cross-securitized.
Agreed. I mean, to beat or to master this pillar of mastery around borrowing power, I think you need a personal banker. But I want to redefine the definition of the personal banker, because the amount of times I spoke to a client they've actually got this kudos that comes from having their personal banker. No, I don't need any help from a mortgage broker, for example, because I've got my own personal banker. I said, well, how many times has that personal banker of yours changed in the last 3 years? Well, it's actually the second one I've got. So I want to redefine the personal banker. And for the benefit of the listeners, our business in Power Wealth is a mortgage broker, so we need to declare that. So we've obviously got a vested interest in saying this, but I genuinely believe to master the pillar of borrowing power, you need to have not only a mortgage broker, but an investment savvy mortgage broker, because I'm worried about if you don't, you want a specialist, not a generalist, and you can actually still get a generalist if you have a mortgage broker. So
that's a bit of gold. Specialist, not a generalist. So if you're going to see a person in a bank, that's, they've got mum and dad coming in, first home buyer coming in next, the next person coming in, and they've got to try to be all things to all people. But if you've got a great investment savvy mortgage broker, you've got a specialist. Good.
And you can also have a generalist within a mortgage broker, because they might be doing a $300,000 first home loan here, an investment property
Correct.
off the plan in the city, and they're not generally writing loans that are specific. So an investment savvy, to give you a quick example, we had one of our finance advisors had to look at a scenario strategically and ordered valuations on all of the properties, but then needed to decide which one he was going to pull the trigger on based on what was the best outcome for the client, because he's seen this scenario many, many times before and knew how to get the best optimal outcome for that client. Whereas if someone's just a generalist, who's facilitating a transaction and wanting to get it done, they're not necessarily going to take a step back. Or even if they had the desire to take a step back, they might not have the experience to know how to actually put that, to use your thing before about strategy, might not know what the optimal strategy even looks like. So I want to redefine that for the listeners, that get yourself a personal banker without a shadow of a doubt, but redefine what that is, because in our view, that personal banker should be should be an investment savvy mortgage broker, because generally speaking, if you've got one, the investment savvy mortgage broker has an entrepreneurial spirit. They may or may not be working for themselves, but they're generally working in their own sort of business environment, because they've got to create an environment of earning their own keep.
That's right.
Versus someone who's in the bank. And no disrespect to any listeners who are in the bank, but just sort of broad brush, they're an employee and maybe have an employee mindset around that.
Well, I know. I've been doing mortgages now for over 10 years. I always used to say to my clients, I am your personal banker. And they say, and even better, I'm your personal banker across 30 plus lenders.
That's awesome.
So the personal banker inside the bank has 5 options for you. I've probably got about 250 options for you. So they're limited by what they can offer. Whereas I said, I work for you. I don't work for anyone else. If you love what I do in terms of the advice that I do, both tactically, strategically, then you're going to say I'm the one for you. And that's how I would work with my clients. So look, I haven't done lending for a while, but I oversee our lending division. And that's what I say to the guys. I mean, and that's why in our business, an example, Bryce, we've gone with a specialist model. We've gone with every part of the process that we help out with clients investing in property. I didn't want a jack of all trades to be giving the property investment advice, the lending advice, and then trying to buy the property. It's a bit like a financial planner has got to be across so many spectrums of information, from pensions to rollovers to tax to wills to bonds. They just simply can't be that. So there's just not enough time in the day to really refine that. And I only need to look to the medical fraternity, as we've said in previous podcasts, that they've got a GP, someone who looks after that. And I reckon sometimes it is the mortgage broker is the GP, because they can help the household understand better budgeting and then also talk about the lending side. They've got the credit license. They're the ones who can look after the money. And then you move on to the specialist, the property investment advisor, and then through to the buyer's agent. That to me is what motivated me to drive this business forward to being that type of business that will allow all of those services. And I just couldn't think that anyone could do it well if you had to, be across all those areas.
Yeah, very, very good point, Ben. And as I look down at the clock, we've raced through to 20 minutes, which is what happens every single week. And I'm just looking down here, and there's so much more that we could talk about. But I think the point here is, if we go back to the point that you made, Ben, if you want to be great at property investing, you need to be great at finance. And I don't think that can be underestimated at all. In terms of if you can get this stuff right, you can be one of the, we've talked about it a lot, that 73% of people stop at one investment property. If you get this pillar of mastery right, you could be one of the few who actually buy multiple properties and without too much dramas. Now, we also want to talk about the fact that these views and opinions are our own. We're not giving advice, we're giving out some general information here. So as with anyone who's listening to our podcast, in any of the information that we give, we'd certainly encourage you to pressure test the information that we give you to see if it actually works for you in your situation. We're trying to give good quality, clean information that we think is actually agendaless. And
we haven't given any specific recommendations, so we're not giving any personal advice here, so we're fine.
Yeah, so there you go, folks. Again, we'd love to chat about some more, and again, we will down the track. But last week we put a link to our webinar, which got a really great response. So thanks to those listeners. If you've got some feedback for us, if you wouldn't mind going to thepropertycouch.com.au and letting us know if there's any other webinars that you'd actually like us to do. We'd love to tailor it so that you are getting some more quality information. And given that we are talking about the borrowing power mastery today, Ben's written a free report that we're going to put on our free resources section on the Property Couch called the 7 Common Mistakes When Selecting a Loan. And that's going to help you with some of the stuff that we didn't necessarily covered today. But some gold today is to avoid cross-collateralisation, create your own personal banker and probably redefine who that is, and look for an investment-savvy mortgage broker who can then become your trusted advisor. So lots covered today, Ben. It's been fun, as always.
Arrivederci, sayonara. Oh, which one am I at this week? Oh, sayonara.
We're going around the world with these
We are.
Arrivederci and sayonara.
Caught me by surprise. I shouldn't.
We'll give you a heads up for this week. But it's been fun, folks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for playing.